Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
A very, very good evening. Monday, the 9th of March 2026. My name is Raja Miah. This is a Recusant 9 transmission. First of all, my apologies for last night. I was in Birmingham with my daughter. She'd got some tickets for the All England badminton final. So my day involved going down there and sitting and watching some badminton with my child, and then coming back, and of course I never got back on in time or in any fit capacity to really put out a transmission last night. So my apologies for last night. Hopefully I didn't ruin too many of your Sunday evening plans. Now, first and foremost, an update on the last week's events, really. The plan was that I would be hosted on Friday night on GB News, and this followed Talk TV bravely hosting me. Finally, Alex Phillips, who I consider to be a friend of mine, Alex Phillips, finally convinced her editors to have me on, and I think the contribution I made was of value and provided an insight that is far more informed, dare I say, than your generic commentator who comes along and has an opinion on all matters without really an insight into any of them, which is why I don't speak on all matters. I try and focus my attention on the issues I have an understanding of and, dare I say, expertise in. So that is what I tend to do. So GB News got in touch, and of course the day after they got in touch, and they got in touch relentlessly, text messages, emails, web messages, whichever route they could, and I responded politely and civilly within half an hour, and they cancelled me the next day. Now, you need to understand this. This is ongoing, and for those of you who make excuses for them, you need to stop making excuses for them. This has got bugger all to do with Ofcom. If you listen to some of the guests that they have on, they are, I'd say they're outrageous, some of them, but they do it to escalate and wind people up, and that is one of their tactics. I don't come from that space. I come from a very calm space, regardless of what some of them say. I come from a very calm space, a very informed position, and I not only articulate what is going on precisely and clearly, I evidence everything as well. So stop making excuses for them. I'm not saying pick a side. I'm simply saying stop making excuses for them. For those of you who are, this has got nothing to do with Ofcom. This has got nothing to do with, in any way, I am somehow unpalatable or will say something or swear or something like that. Listen, I've sat in rooms with prime ministers. I've sat next to world leaders. I've presented in front of thousands of people. So no, this is something else entirely, and I won't speculate, but this is something else entirely, and it's entirely on them, and it has been ongoing for a number of years. You will see this continue, and more so This is why you need to make a decision amongst yourselves and individually. You need to make a decision. Because if it's left to them, this will go nowhere. You will not get the analysis, you will not get the insights, and you'll just get superficial nonsense which has allowed it to be what it's been for so long. You've now got exactly. You've now got a national inquiry. We know it's going to be rigged. It's being rigged in front of your eyes. And essentially you've got a small number of people, of which I'd like to consider myself amongst them, who have the track record of exposing it and mobilizing people and giving the politicians the confidence they need, and dare I say the journalist information they need. So that's a choice you need to make. But please don't get in touch with me with some bullshit about defending them, because this isn't a one-off. This has been going on for at least 3 years now. They have people on from my town who I've briefed beforehand of what to say. And they've had people on from my town who've took my work and claimed it as theirs. And then use it. That's not the issue I have. Then they use it for self-promotion. That's the issue I have.
Together here is a really horrid combination that nobody really ever wants to talk about, which is the intersection of race and sexual predation. And let's be honest that actually a lot of this is bringing those two things together in an unpleasant way. The issue about the grooming gangs inquiry is very straightforward. The government clearly never wanted these two things to be put together. And I suspect that their big reason for not wanting those two things to be put together is that much of this took place in areas which are run by local Labour councils, and that the authorities who ought to be watching over this, stopping it, monitoring it, and all of the rest of it, were controlled by those councils, and they did nothing. The point I make in my piece today is that this particular phenomenon is not like other kinds of child abuse for a number of reasons. Number one, scale. Most, child abuse rings, even the big ones, you're talking about a few children, maybe a dozen. Here, we're talking about tens of thousands. This is industrial. Secondly, the issue about who the children are. This is a horrible way to put it. You kindly said I'd been at this a long time. I'm afraid much longer than you think. I won a Royal Television Society Award for a film on paedophiles back in 1988, 37 years ago. It was the first award I ever won. And I had to spend a week sitting interviewing paedophiles in a darkened room. It's one of the most loathsome experiences of my life, but I learnt some things. One of them is that they do two things. One, they choose children for quote-unquote aesthetic reasons. In this case, the grooming gangs, these children are chosen because of their race. They are chosen because they are white and because they are outside the community of the groomers. And secondly, they are chosen, the way they operate is not in secrecy. All other kinds of child abuse, the first thing the abuser says to the child is, don't tell anybody because I'll kill you. Or for a younger child, they will say to that child, if anybody knows, they will take your parents away and put them in jail. The difference with this grooming gangs thing is that everybody knows. It happens in public. The girls are but first attracted by usually by young men from within those communities, flash cars, cigarettes, they give them drugs, all the rest of it. And the girls, and I did, as you said, this film 10 years ago, and what the girls tell you is, this is my boyfriend, because they think that's what's happening. Only later do they discover they're hooked on drugs, they need the alcohol and all of that, and then they're passed around amongst older men. So this is just completely different. And the other thing, which I think really makes it different, and brings us back to, if you like, horror of of narrowing the inquiry, is that these people know that they are protected. They're protected politically. They're protected by social workers. They're protected by local police, because everybody says we don't want to ramp up tensions in the community, and these girls, partly their own fault. That is the scandal here, and that's the thing I think that I wanted to bring out, because it's I'm beginning to get around somehow that actually, oh, this is no different to anything else. It could not be more different.
That is actually old. It did the rounds last week again on X as though it was new, and millions of people watched it again. It's actually old. Now, some context. Trevor Phillips and I know each other. I had the pleasure of having some of my work funded historically by the Race Equality Council that he led. Yes, the racist Raja Miah was at one point funded by the Race Equality Council. Some of his work was anyway. And more significantly, I helped when they transitioned to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, of who he was the first chair of. So I know Trevor. I've presented for him. I've run workshops for both him when he was at the RAC and the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So that's the context. And you can see, you can hear for yourself, Trevor Phillips is echoing, in his own words, but word for word, everything that I have been saying. However, Trevor Phillips is wrong on this, in some ways. First and foremost, he claims that the local authorities did nothing. Those are his exact words. The local authorities did nothing. He's wrong on that, because we know the local authorities did do something. They covered it up. In town after town, city after city, the local authorities, in partnership with the police, in partnership with the local media, all conspired and worked together to cover it up. And they did so in the name of maintaining community relations. This is a fact. And I'm not criticising him at all, Helen. I think what is said is great. I just wanted to, this is my area of expertise. And I think it would be wrong of me to just agree completely. He'll probably have a chuckle at me if he ever come across me and I said this to him. So, first and foremost, that they did do something. Then he talks about some of the unique features as to why this is different. And I want to discuss this with you and shift it slightly, if I may. And yeah, Trevor Phillips, Sir Trevor Phillips now, isn't he? He wasn't Sir when I knew him. Sir Trevor Phillips, yeah. No one is going to dispute his expertise. One, I don't know who you are. Two, you're new to me. And third, if you knew how this operated, I don't delete comments. Okay? If you've said something that's sworn or anything like that, then you're going to, end up being deleted. And if you want to start writing nonsense, I'm just going to ban you. So there you go. Off you go. The racists hate me. The racists hate me because I create a space for this. Just as the Labour lot hate me, the racists hate me. Because I navigate this in a way where I take it to a place where it's a more nuanced, more sophisticated and a more authentic understanding of what is taking place. That's what I've done since the beginning, and that's what I'll continue to do. Okay. First and foremost, he says that they were targeted because they were white and outside the community. Oh, Trevor. There's more to it. One, and he's come up with 3 reasons, so I thought, let me, it's been shared over 1 million times, which is amazing. So let me give you a more detailed understanding of this. They were targeted because they were white and outside the community, but who were they targeted by? Predominantly Pakistani men, predominantly Muslims, and I've always maintained they were targeted because these were racially motivated crimes and religiously justified. But there's more than that. They were also targeted because of the existing prejudices within the wider white professional communities towards the white working class, specifically white working class girls. So, lifestyle choices was the term that they used to condemn the culture of the working class and also wash the hands of these children as though somehow, child prostitutes. These are official descriptions. These aren't words I use or I feel at all comfortable in using. So, it isn't just that they were white and outside the community. It is also that the existing white community, the professional white community, held these children in contempt. So this is where we get 3 of my 5 or 6 themes that I talk about: racially motivated, religiously justified, and culturally accepted. Culturally accepted not in the sense of the Pakistani or the Muslim communities, but culturally accepted within the culture of the white professional communities. See, more nuance, more sophisticated again. How I'm explaining this to you takes you to an uncomfortable place where we've got to ask questions in ways that perhaps some people find extremely uncomfortable. White liberal women, just say it. Some of them want women. Yeah? Next, he says that they operated out in the open and they used a specific model called the boyfriend model, the love jihad model, I think it's also been described as, where slightly older young men would befriend slightly younger girls and lure them into thinking that they were their girlfriends. That is one of the many methods they used. It is not the only method. And of course, where he is definitely right is that it was out in the open. 100% out in the open, so much so that the community that these men came from participated in it and also protected it. So the 4th of the sort of strands, the pillars I talk about that makes this distinct, is that they were community protected. The men who were involved were protected by the very communities. Some participated in it because they accepted it as normal, and it's what you used little white girls for, and they were asking for it. And again, not my words whatsoever. These are the words of I'm paraphrasing exactly the testimonies in court. So, there's that element to it in terms of out in the open, because they were protected in the community and protected, and mothers excused the behaviours of their sons and their husbands by saying the children, 12-year-old, 13-year-old girls seduced them. Matter of public record. The immediate family members, you'll have seen it last year, I think one of the Channel 4 documentaries that recently came out did a feature on it, where they had a WhatsApp group and the sister and the family members protested that these men were innocent. And the girls had been throwing themselves on them, and they were culpable for their own actions. 12-year-old children. No. And Trevor talks about the boyfriend model. There's more to it than just the boyfriend model. In the early days of this, from what I can evidence myself and my own research, and I spoke to the likes of, in my own town, Councillor Hughie MacDonald, who's on record testifying around this, was that he turned up to a children's home and the girls were climbing out of the windows to get into the cars of the men outside, and the social workers and the care home workers were saying there's nothing they can do about it. Unfortunately, sadly, one of the first waves of this was girls that they found accessible. These were girls from damaged homes, these were girls in care, these were girls with lifestyles that would put themselves at risk, and the system that was meant to protect them failed to protect them. So 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds at taxi ranks late at night, kebab shops, and so forth, so on and so forth. However, so that wasn't a boyfriend model. That was a failure to safeguard vulnerable children model, first and foremost. When these girls were used up or were being used up, and the phrase used was fresh meat, once they went looking for fresh meat, they wanted more purer girls, less damaged girls. And that's where the boyfriend model emerged. And the boyfriend model was essentially slightly older young men, so 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, driving around in their flash cars, picking up 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, but there were no longer girls in the care system. They were targeting girls in schools, they were targeting girls specifically in youth clubs where that interaction took place naturally. So in the 90s and the 2000s, if you went into any youth club in the country, you're just as likely to see a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old there as you would do an 18 or 19-year-old. The government strategy was 13 to 19 was the age group, or 13 to 25. That's how they grouped services in the community, 13 to 25 or 13 to 21. But there was that definite overlap. And that put children of 13-year-olds within the vicinity of 18, 19, 20, 21, and so on, older. Now that took place. And the grooming and then the gangs and the Charlie Peters has evidenced all of that. That then took place as another grooming model. A third grooming model that evolved from that was that they needed more girls. And instead of just targeting the girls who were allowed to put themselves in those positions of going into the youth clubs and stuff, where do you go? You've been to the care homes, you've been to the youth clubs. Well, the next natural progression, of course, is the schools. So they targeted the schools. They targeted the schools in a number of ways. But one of the ways in which they definitely targeted the schools was that they would pull up their cars outside the school gates and essentially lure children into the cars. They did this at one of the schools in my own town that I evidenced, and the local MP for that school, and it was Count Hill School, and then it became Waterhead Academy. You see, I name names throughout. I've always named names. These schools would watch on and do nothing. There was another school, I think it was Radcliffe School, where a young man has been in touch with me with testimony to confirm that they saw it with their own eyes and the teachers briefed them to ignore it and do nothing for fear of community relations. There was a teacher in Waterhead Academy who got out into the street and tried to protect and grab hold of children who were being put into cars. He had his funeral early last year. All evidenced. I know support staff who went to the homes, rape dens, let's not call them homes, rape dens, to pick up children because they knew they would be there and take them away. Not one of these men was ever arrested, charged, anything like that. When I exposed all of this in the constituency it was taking place, Oldham East this was, specifically, the MP, Debbie Abrahams, who's now a powerful chair of a select committee, falsified evidence and attempted to have me prosecuted. So that is another model. They basically lured girls at the school gates and then abused them. But they needed to get beyond the school gates. The school gates was a barrier that they needed to reach beyond to reach more children, more young people. And they did this by recruiting younger members of the clans. This is where the bravery system comes in. This is where the drug dealing system kicks in. They recruited younger members who were of a school age, in the same forms, in the same year groups, maybe a year group older. So no one would ordinarily think twice to a boy in year 11 hanging around with a girl in year 9 or year 10. But these boys' job was to lure these girls out, believing them to be their girlfriends, lure them out, and then pass them on to their older brothers, cousins, uncles, fathers, grandfathers. So that also took place. And once they'd exhausted this, and alongside the exhausting this, they blackmailed these girls to go and get more children for them. Whether they were in the care homes or in the schools, the youth clubs, they blackmailed these girls to get other girls for them. They threatened them with violence, they threatened their family members, and that's how the rape gangs expanded and accessed more. Yes, they did this all out in the open, but it just wasn't in the open of the communities they came from. It was out in the open of every professional environment that interacted with children. I'm not criticising Trevor. I think he's very brave to say what he's done, what he has said, but you can see I take it somewhere else. And to those of you who are newer to me, and those of you who've been with me maybe for a little bit longer, you will see my story never changes. My analysis remains consistent, and I have no reason to lie. I have absolutely no reason to lie. Why would I lie? And for my Labour Party friends who are here, and the council and the police and whoever else are listening in on this, who want to undermine me and smear me, before I came into this space 7 years ago, we're approaching our eighth year, 7 years ago, before I came into this space 7 years ago, I had over 20 years of experience working directly with children and in communities with a specific remit of tackling extremism, protecting our country from terrorists. This is my background, this is my context, this is where I get my legitimacy from. And you can listen to me now. As scary, as unbelievable as some of this sounds, do I make sense? So yet again, why will not one mainstream media outlet so much as interview me? Trevor then goes on to say they knew they were protected. When we first entered this space, and those critics of mine who say, well, plenty of people did this work before you came along, Raja. Hands on, hands up. I've said from the outset, I did not believe this took place in the way it took place. My starting point is an apology for arriving to this late. This is not to take credit, it's an apology for arriving late. But what I did that's different to what came before is I managed to articulate the nature of the political cover-up and the association with the bloc Muslim vote, the bribery system, and how these politicians knew that they had to keep these people sweet or else there would be consequences. And now you are seeing those consequences on the issue of Gaza, even the stupidity of what's taking place in Iran. And let me quantify that. The Iranian regime is horrific. It kills children, particularly little girls. And whilst this regime was barbarically butchering its own citizens, not one of these wankers held protests against them. But now it's been attacked. Suddenly, the pro-Iranian, pro-human rights, they're not pro-human rights. They're anti-us. These are Islamists, these are jihadists, these are sectarians, and you can see how Labour, the government itself, is having to walk a tightrope for fear of upsetting this bloc vote that, if it turns completely against them, would see at least 3 or 4 government ministers took out. Never mind 100 seats going. You saw what happened in Gorton, Labour stronghold. So the idea of a bloc Muslim vote and these people being protected because of what they can do politically to you, essentially hold you to blackmail, it's not a conspiracy theory. You're witnessing it yourself. But thank you, Trevor. They knew they were protected, which demonstrates the political dimension. But there's something far deeper and far more painful than just that. There's also, from my point of view, that if you admit to what took place, if you tackle it head on with the strength of will, the conviction, and the honesty that it deserves, then you find yourself in a position from where there can be no turning back from. The government strategy, successive government strategy, over 50 years or so, of a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multicultural society, and the way in which we promote that has comprehensively and systematically failed. And it's comprehensively and systematically failed because men from predominantly one background were involved in the industrial scale gang rape of over 100,000 children who are indigenous to this country. And that is something they do not want to admit. For those of you new to me, my name is Raja Miah. 7 years in, 3 of those, at least 3 of those, on police bail or under police surveillance. Hiya, Greater Manchester Police, how are you? Threats of libel, being sued, God knows what else. My hair's falling out is the latest from what I can tell. But I'm still here, 100% community funded, supported by you, and if I seem a bit more stressed than usual, because unfortunately We're losing our supporters. We're losing our subscribers. People signed up for a year and supported me for a year and clearly don't want to support me any more than for a year. We've lost about a third of our paid subscribers. I do not have any other income, and for me to do this work is entirely dependent on you. So if you're new to me, please sign up. If you're already signed up and you can't afford a paid regular subscription, you can just buy me a coffee. Something like £3. You'd do it if you met me in real life. You'd support me, you'd fund me. The BBC won't do this. None of the mainstream media outlets, including GB News, will provide the analysis I've just done in the last half an hour. And articulated in a way that is easy to understand for anyone and everyone. Thank you for the gifting of those memberships. And it's as simple as that, mate. Joy, it's as simple as that. Okay, let's move on to Baroness Warsi. I've got the actual interview that she gave to Andrew, is it Bolton, the Sky guy. Times on Times Radio as well now. So let me bring that up and let me play it for you. Just give me 1 second whilst I find it.
Which on for, I think it's 2 years now.
People who have been involved in that scandal, nobody can doubt.
Are involved with that, but does it mean that we, or indeed Sharia courts, does it
Why we need to have better.
mean that honour killings and all the rest, which, there's first kinds of behaviour, which in the argument, of course, is that it may end up
Targeting a specific as rhetoric.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find
out that the rising
starting point.
Specific definition should be doing, which is making sure that Muslim communities, British Muslim communities, are protected like other communities in our country rightly are. Have, for example, listen.
No, I understand that, but on the other hand, there are aspects of the Muslim community that there may be cult. Muslims are involved with that, but does it mean that we
that people forces were there to derail how our kids move to working day in, day out?
And if you get that change, will that include
This is a question that will be
the Israeli president there?
Listen to Times Radio every night from it's your dream nightly destination. Book the perfect holiday.
We interrupt your usual broadcast for something.
750,000 installations.
Curious, see the world, the thinking person with the world. Exploring the...
And on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
Time's now 10:51. Thanks for being with us this Sunday morning. Now, as regular listeners will know, every Sunday around this time, we try and ask one of the big questions of the week. And this week, ministers next week are preparing to publish a new social cohesion strategy, which will include the much anticipated new definition of Islamophobia, the installation of a czar for the Muslim community, funding for community protection, and an end-of-year state of extremism report. The previous definition, incidentally, of Islamophobia refers to prejudice, discrimination, or hostility directed at Muslims or those perceived as Muslims rooted in racism and targeting expressions of Muslimness. Well, joining us now is Baroness Warsi, Sayeeda Warsi, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, who helped write the original definition of Islamophobia. I believe you're in Doha. Hello to you.
Hi, good Adam.
And just briefly on the situation in Qatar, I mean, is it all calm?
It is relatively calm and has been certainly for the last 24 hours. It's of course it's unnerving. You know, we're in a war zone, and we're out here with family. My grandchildren live out here with my children, but it's also quite surreal because I think, other than the moments that are punctuated with what you feels obviously like missiles being intercepted, life kind of carries on as normal. So let's just hope sanity is restored soon and this terrible war comes to an end.
Why do we need in this country, the UK, a definition of Islamophobia?
I think for a very long time now, there have been conversations that have been had around prejudice and racism and whether or not the law as it currently stands provides the amount of detail for both public and private sector organisations to be able to respond to, identify and have measures in place to tackle these various forms of racism. And back in 2016, so about a decade ago, in the United Kingdom, we became one of the first countries in the world actually to adopt a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism, because we felt that even though the law did protect Jewish communities, we wanted to go further in understanding this form of racism and making sure that public and sector organisations predominantly, but also the private sector, understood this. And ever since then, since Theresa May's government, the Conservative government, adopted that and has kind of embedded that in almost every public sector organisation, there have been recognition. There has been a recognition within government that the rising form of anti-Muslim racism too needs to have a definition, and various attempts were made in government to try and make this happen. There was, of course, a level of hostility within government certainly within the Conservative government from this happening. And in the end, a cross-party group of parliamentarians brought forward a definition which has been widely accepted and recognised. But the Labour government, who adopted that particular cross-party parliamentary definition, felt that even though they'd adopted it, they wanted to do a further piece of work to bring forward a government-agreed definition. And that further piece of work has really been taking place over 2025. And I think next week they're going to publish their version of a definition, which will, again, like the anti-Semitism definition, will be a non-legally binding working definition, which will be used hopefully to inform and start the process of making sure that Muslim communities are protected like other communities.
I mean, has it, having a definition, has that helped protect the Muslim community?
Many would argue that not having a definition hasn't necessarily protected the British Jewish community, but that should not be a reason for not having a definition of anti-Semitism. I think sometimes it's a signal, it's a indication of what we would expect society to be. It's what would be referred to under the Cameron years as nudge behaviour, making sure that public sector organisations are acutely aware of how this kind of daily microaggressions that take place in the workplace, but at the extreme end, you know, where it impacts on people's lives. And we've seen examples of that, countless examples of that are quoted in the parliamentary definition. And again, I think I understand that examples will be quoted in the government definition. So let's hope that this is a start. I think there's been such an obsessiveness from certain quarters in politics and in the media about the definition that we've actually failed to get on with doing what the definition should be doing, which is making sure that Muslim communities, British Muslim communities, are protected like other communities in our country rightly are. Because,
of course, the argument could be made that by singling out different communities for special protections, you are, in fact, isolating them and pointing the finger at people.
You could make that argument, but I don't think that people within the British Jewish community would argue that they're being singled out by being provided with extra protection, whether that's in the form of protection to their places of worship or schools or by having a definition. And I don't think that, if you look at what happened with the race riots, Adam, just a couple of years ago, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that those were specifically targeted at migrants and specifically Muslims, even Muslims who have had a long history of being in the United Kingdom. And so I think that nobody can doubt that the rising form of anti-Muslim racism, whether we find it in the media, whether we find it at the receiving end of far-right activity, if you look at far-right activity, protests, marches, rhetoric, everything that is coming out of the far right at the moment is targeting Muslims. So there's no doubt that in the rise of racism and fascism in the United Kingdom is targeting a specific community, and government rightly should respond when a community is under targeted attack in that way.
Because, I mean, the other argument, of course, is that it may end up almost throwing a protection over criticism of types of behaviour which in the UK would not be regarded as acceptable. I mean, obviously there's been the whole question of the grooming gangs, but, there's first cousin marriage, there's other issues related to honour killings and all the rest, which obviously are minority of Muslims are involved with that. But does it mean that or indeed Sharia courts, does it mean that people can't criticise those things?
No, and I think, the way that we're having this conversation, Adam, is, again, a reason why we need to have better understanding of these issues. Just because somebody is involved in the sexual abuse of children in the northern towns, but happens to be Muslim, does not mean that we then superimpose that on the whole Muslim community. Just like, for example, listen.
No, I understand that, but on the other hand, there are aspects of the Muslim community that there may be cultural norms that are not acceptable in this country.
Well, not necessarily. Look, the biggest sexual scandal and the abuse of children that we're facing at the moment is the Epstein scandal, and the number of people who have been involved in that scandal who also may have a shared faith, for example, the Jewish faith, should not be a reason why we then say, well, is there something culturally wrong with Jewish people, which makes them more prone to abuse children? Because that is anti-Semitism and that is racism. And I think until we start to understand that the actions of individuals cannot be superimposed on communities as a whole, just because Catholic priests have in the past abused children does not mean that all Catholics, or there's something specific about Catholicism which actually promotes or supports paedophilia. That is racism, that is bigotry, that is fascism. And therefore, I think the quicker we move to a position where individuals are judged by their individual characteristics, and that individual characteristics of bad people within those groups are not therefore superimposed on communities as a whole and used as a tool to demonize a whole community, and therefore really effectively stand them out as a target for racist and abuse.
Baroness Warsi, thank you very much indeed for joining us this Sunday.
It took me a while to find that. I was getting really exasperated because I first heard a snippet of it on X by someone, and I'm like listening to it and thinking, no, she can't have just said that in the way she said that. There's got to be more in some context. And actually, no, she did. She's the one who introduced the grooming gangs. And Adam Bolton picked up on it, and she just doubled down. She just doubled down on it. It's just unprecedented. This is a baroness who's, it seems her family have left, doesn't it? It seems as though they're not in the United Kingdom. So I think she's resigned her Tory party membership, Adrian, after Gaza, I think it was, or something. Some of these people, it's difficult for me because I'm from these very communities myself. It is difficult for me, but some of these people, I don't believe they have a loyalty to the United Kingdom. I genuinely don't. I've got some analysis. I'd like to share it with you. My aim was 45 minutes. We've had 45 minutes already, so if you bear with me maybe for another 20 minutes or so, and then I will bid you good night. But before I do my analysis, please, if you can, subscribe to Red Wall and the Rabble. I've just checked whilst you're all listening to the interview. Not a single sign-up. If there aren't sign-ups, then this work in this way becomes pointless. And I'll have to go about trying to do it in a different way. This only works if the numbers are growing and people are supporting me. There's no cost to sign up to the bloody webpage. It's free. There's over 600 people who've joined me this evening so far. So take the minute to sign up, please, and help amplify my voice and my analysis, because you're not going to get this anywhere else, are you? No, I ain't got the time, mate, to build up somewhere else, I'm afraid. And it's the position always has been to hold the centre ground, try and fight to maintain a position in the platforms that ordinary people would access rather than those going looking for stuff. So Facebook, we fight to remain on there, and you can see how we regularly get censored on there. YouTube, every video of mine is demonetized almost immediately, so there's never anything from adverts or stuff like that. And of course X is the platform where we have most traction, and that's only because Elon Musk took it over. So please, if you can, sign up to Redwall and the Rabble. Yeah, of course she is. Of course she is bright enough to know that. Thank you, Stuart. Grateful, thank you. So, Warsi is essentially alleging racism. And the racism accusation has a documented history in the Pakistani rape gang scandal. And it was used to silence the very people who were trying to expose it. And it was used to silence the very children who were experiencing it. And Warsi, even though she knows this, is using it again. As the grooming gang scandal dominates the national conversation this week. Yeah, the consultation closed on Friday. Baroness Warsi will have been fully aware of this, fully aware of how it's rigged, how the terms of reference have been narrowed, how the Prime Minister at PMQs earlier in the week refused to confirm that the consultation process was genuine. All of that took place this week. This Baroness would have known. She would know how hard we have fought to finally have our voices heard. And what does she do? Warsi, Sayeeda Warsi, Baroness Warsi, goes on air to shut the conversation down. She introduced this element herself. The conversation was about the cohesion strategy, the government's new strategy, the Islamophobia definition. She shifted it to the grooming gangs. She accused racism and she tried to shut it down. And she did it with a comparison she knew would land hard. Now, Warsi, like our Home Secretary, is a Pakistani Muslim. Clans, cartels, bravery, all of that. She argued that the biggest sexual abuse scandal today is the case surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. And some of the people involved in that network, she said, happened to share the Jewish faith. Nobody would claim there is something culturally wrong with Jewish people that makes them more prone to abusing children. To do so, she suggested, would be anti-Semitic. I'll quote her. You heard about a quote her. The biggest sexual scandal and the abuse of children that we're facing at the moment is the Epstein scandal, and the number of people who have been involved in that scandal who also may have a shared faith, for example the Jewish faith, should not be a reason why we then say, well, there is something culturally wrong with Jewish people which makes them more prone to abuse children, because that is anti-Semitism and that is racism. Those are her words, not mine. So if you have been asking why predominantly Pakistani Muslim men in towns and cities across the country have spent years, decades raping white working class girls, and why institutions knew and said nothing, why politicians covered it up, Warsi has your answer. You are a racist. Sit down. It is a familiar move, not new to this scandal, not new to Warsi. For over a decade, I'll just use Rotherham as an example, before the J report forced official acknowledgement of what had been happening, the institutions did this to everyone who named what was happening racist. Social workers recorded concerns and were told to reframe their findings. Police officers, those are the ones who weren't raping the girls in the car. Police officers raised the ethnic profile of offending networks and were sent on diversity training. Counsellors who asked questions were warned they were feeding the far right. I know of parents who were sent on parenting courses. The accusation of racism was not a response to the scandal. It was deployed against people trying to expose it. It functioned as institutional protection, not for victims, but for the reputations of the organisations that had failed them. Warsi is doing what the institutions did 20 years later. The same logic that told investigators to stay quiet, that warned victims their accounts would cause community tensions, that dismissed journalists such as Andrew Norfolk as irresponsible. That logic is what her Epstein comparison is designed to invoke. The public controversy did not arise from prejudice. It arose because people kept finding the same thing in town after town, year after year. It arose despite every institutional pressure designed to prevent it from arising at all. The pattern was not imposed on the evidence. It came from the evidence. And acknowledging it required fighting through years of coordinated accusation that everyone who named it was acting in bad faith. We are racists. Warsi, she brought this on herself, remember, in this interview, that's why I played you all of it, is asking the public to forget that history, to treat the racism charge as a clean instrument rather than a weapon with a body count. And it has a body count. The girls who were failed by that weapon are still waiting for an honest account of what was done to them. The account begins with what Warsi's comparison is built to erase. These were racially motivated crimes, people. And the Epstein comparison fails. He was a wealthy trafficker who bought access and used what he knew about powerful men to protect himself. The girls he abused and his mates abused came from varied backgrounds. His network was not concentrated in particular towns, did not target a specific type of victim, and nobody in it left a documented record of racial motivation or using religious contempt as justification for what they were doing. Oh, I'm not making excuses for any of them. They were scum, they were vermin. but their motives were not the same. None of this is in the rape gang scandal. The victims in over 100 towns and cities were overwhelmingly vulnerable white girls, many of them already known to social services, girls already written off before anyone came for them. The targeting was not incidental, it was the point. Survivors gave evidence that their abusers selected them because of what they were, and said so whilst gang raping them. They were called kuffar, white slags, dirty white bitches, all sorts of names. Horrific, whilst they were being gang raped. They had curry powder thrown over them. They were locked in cages. Offenders described non-Muslim girls, even when they were caught on trial. They shared their viewpoint that these white girls were morally inferior and sexually available. They deserved it. This was not private rationalization. It was said out loud to the girls being abused and repeated in the courts as their defense. The abuse was carried out by groups of men operating together as part of a clan. Victims were shared between them and transported between addresses. What was being done to them had become normal practice within their networks, within their communities. When survivors tried to report the abuse, they were turned away again and again and again across agency after agency over years, over decades. By reaching for Epstein, Warsi removes every one of those features and replaces them with something she can answer. What remains is a clean moral lesson about not blaming whole communities for individual crimes. Nobody disagrees with that in its purest form. No one is blaming whole communities, and those who are find themselves isolated in their viewpoint. But this is the truth. What she's doing has got nothing to do with what had happened in these towns and cities to over 100,000 little white girls, and these crimes are distinct. The abuse frequently involved groups of men operating together. Survivors describe being passed from one abuser to another in houses and across towns and cities where this appeared to be routine. That routine did not come from nowhere. The biradari system is a clan-based kinship network with deep roots in rural Pakistan. Mirpur, first cousin marrying Mirpur. Transplanted into British towns, and I think Baroness Warsi is Mirpuri. I know Fing is Mirpuri. The Home Secretary is Mirpuri origin. Yeah. Transplanted. Those cultural views, traditions, whatever, transplanted into British towns through successive waves of migration and held together through bloodline and obligation. Loyalty is owed to the clans. Men within a biradari network owe each other protection and silence as a matter of honour. Dare I say it, men and women within a biradari network owe each other protection and silence as a matter of honour. What happens inside the network stays inside the network. This is the structure that investigators kept running into without naming. When offenders shared victims across a town, they were not acting as strangers who happened to share an interest in gang raping little girls. They were acting as men whose networks had been telling them what they owed each other and what they could keep quiet for generations. The secrecy was not incidental, it was built in. The same infrastructure did not stay quiet when prosecutions began. They defended these men. Relatives of offenders publicly blamed the victims and accused them of lying. Supporters gathered outside courts during trials to protect their family members. Protest that the prosecutions were racist. The racists were actually us for prosecuting these men, drawing on the same logic of collective reputation that had protected these networks from the start. Community activists, local figures who dared speak out, were dismissed, attacked, demonized, and the entire issue was promoted as a conspiracy or smear campaign as recently as this time last year. What's his name? An independent MP from Birmingham. He stood up at an event wanting an airport in Mirpur, where they're all from, and essentially called the Ayub Khan, that's it, essentially called the grooming gangs a far-right conspiracy. They need to say that. They need to maintain that. Many of the girls targeted by the rape gangs were already known to social services. They were in care from unstable homes, already filled by the adults responsible for them before the abuse began. Warsi could have picked up on that. The contempt by the white middle class, the white working class. No. Won't do it. Can't do it. We've got to be the racist one. We've got to be it. And this racism decision, it's a decision made repeatedly across many years. These girls were not the kind of victims whose suffering was worth the trouble of pursuing. When they stopped reporting, the agencies recorded that as a resolution. Their testimony was discounted, not because it was incredible, but because acting on it was inconvenient. The abuse continued because the institutions entrusted to stop it chose not to. Warsi knows all of this. And I'll tell you, I'll quantify it in a minute. She knows what the racism accusation does. She watched it silence social workers and kept counsellors from asking questions, all the whilst girls were being passed between men in houses across England and Wales, Scotland. She watched it hold long enough that it took a statutory inquiry to force acknowledging of what every local authority in these towns and cities already knew. She's not confused about the history. She is counting on the public being confused about it. Dare I say, being scared about it. The Epstein comparison says nothing about why working class white girls were targeted. Nothing about kuffars, nothing about the Biradari networks that organised the offending and then organised a collective defence when prosecutions began. Nothing about the institutional decisions that left these girls unprotected for decades. It sidesteps every specific feature of the scandal and lands in a place where the only question is whether an entire community is being blamed for individual crimes, and we are racists. She's making a choice. She's watched this mechanism operate for decades. She knows it works. She's not making a mistake with this comparison. She is making a choice. And it is the same choice that the institutions made, the politicians made, the police officers made, and everyone else responsible for failing these children made. It is easier to do what Warsi is doing than tell the truth. And I said I wanted to quantify this and condemn her. Damn her. He says, here we go. Maybe, yes we have. Mark Goodwin, former candidate, reform guy. This is a statement he received from the Conservative MP, former Conservative MP in Telford, Lucy Allen. Yeah, Telford, rape gang scandal, Telford report. Let me read this to you. The horrific crimes perpetrated against vulnerable girls in towns and cities across our country by groups of Pakistani men are now finally out in the open. She issued this statement just after we forced it out this time last year. I feel a huge sense of relief that finally child sexual exploitation can no longer be hidden away as a shameful secret by those in authority. This is a former MP whose party was in government at the time, remember. It has been a long and I suppose a hard struggle to get here. Or it has been a long struggle to get here. When I started speaking out in Parliament about CSE in 2016, having met Telford victims, the pushback was swift and robust. There was coordinated official response by people in positions of power. Telford Council leader, now Telford's Labour MP Sean Davis, immediately published a letter to the Home Secretary stating that no inquiry into CSE was necessary. He backed up his assertion with claims that we now know were false, so he lied. Multiple senior figures were asked to be co-signatories to his claims, to lend authority to them, and they all readily agreed, so they were accessories to a cover-up. These people should be in prison. The council leader and his councillors, instead of trying to right wrongs, set about discrediting the messengers, not just me, the MP, but investigative journalists and victims, even claiming one victim was coming forward so she could sell her story. I was accused of lying, causing division, racism, being unbalanced, irrational, stupid, and motivated not by desire to help victims, but to score political points. This narrative was relentlessly pushed for as long as I campaigned on the issue. It had the intended effect of ensuring that the voice I sought to be for victims would not be heard. Early on, I had an unexpected visit from the Chief Constable of West Mercia Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. So they turned up at her house. That's what she means by unexpected visit. The chief, and she's an MP, remember. The Chief Constable was disparaging about Rotherham MP Sarah Champion, suggesting she was exaggerating the issue and was discredited. He said, "You wouldn't want to be known as a troublemaker like Sarah Champion. It will harm your reputation and career." The then newly minted Junior Minister for Safeguarding, Vicky Atkins MP, told me not to speak to the media on the subject as you do not understand the issues. This is the bit I wanted you to see. I was summoned by Conservative peer Baroness Warsi to explain myself. Then there was the repeated refrain that as 90% of child abuse is committed by white men in domestic settings, why didn't I concern myself with that as it was more significant problem. This was a blatant denial of the existence of groups of interrelated men of Pakistani heritage preying on young girls at school gates, in takeaways, taxis and playgrounds. They did not want to know. Baroness Warsi summoned Lucy Allen to explain herself and told why is she not concentrating on the white men raping white children. The same Baroness Warsi who was interviewed this week and is claiming this is racism. I am not a baron, a sir, or anything like that. I'm just a working class lad from a mill town in the northwest of England who found himself in a position where I look back on and I still ask myself every day, what on earth have you done? And if I sound tired and frustrated, you can see what we are up against. You can see how my voice has been marginalised. You can see, and I'm not an MP. If they can do this to an MP, can you appreciate just what they've been doing to me? Because I just relentlessly continue to speak out. What do we do? What do you do? I know the scale of the fight we have. And I pray I have the strength to see it through. We have at least another 3 years with a rigged inquiry that we need to hold to account and expose. We have a growing number of Islamists who are increasingly emboldened and now protected through this new Islamophobia sort of definition. So the likelihood is I will be arrested and end up in prison for doing what I do. And then we have political parties such as Reform, Restore, who, I'm sorry, do not understand this in this way. And for reasons they know, they only know, they have decided to sideline me and my voice. And yet here I am, begging you for your help so I can have the strength to lean on you and see this through. I hope you find value in my work. I hope I'm of value to all of you who want to see a way through this. My name is Raja Miah. A very good evening.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.